Hello and welcome back to the official Scottish Rugby Podcast together with the Royal Bank of Scotland. On the podcast this week, we hear from Chief Operating Officer Dominic McKay, and Al and Mossy reflect on some of the most memorable grounds they've played at. Joining me, as always, is Al Kellock and Chris Paterson. Now, gents, before we get into the big interview with our Chief Operating Officer, Dominic McKay, this weekend would have been the great Silver Saturday at BT Murrayfield, a great celebration of club rugby. So what I thought I'd ask you guys is, back in the day when you played the game, what are some of the most memorable club games or club grounds you've been to?
My memorables, Alf, what's yours?
Oh, my memorables would be...
We've got a few, eh?
Well, for me, some for great reasons and some for reasons you'd probably want to forget. But the one I'll start with would be the Bear Yards, which is over Allen Glens. So I started there when I was 6 years old. Dotted around all the parks, and genuinely growing up, the ambition from whatever age was to play in that first 15 park. My parents are still over in Bishopbriggs, so I can't drive past the place without feeling a wee bit nostalgic about that park. But it's just a kind of brilliant place to learn your trade, if you like.
I know, it goes without saying where you're from and the place you started out is probably going to be in your list or in and around. I mean, I remember, I said before, we only ever played sevens. So as a primary school kid, I'd train at the school and there was one sevens tournament in Gala, and that was it for the entire season. So you trained every Saturday morning and you'd meet at the school on the day of the ward sports, the ward sevens. Gala, the town used to be split up into different wards and it retained the name the ward sports. So it was just the primary schools across the town when I played. And we'd meet at the primary school and then in your boots and walk to Netherdale, to the back pitches. There was nothing left of your studs before you got there, but you trained all year for one fixture or one sevens tournament. So of course, the place you started is going to hold a few memories, but we must have played in I don't know how many thousand pitches between the pair of us, or the three of us really, over the years. And funny, some just stick in my mind. I remember playing at school, and we would travel to Keele School in Dumbarton. I don't think it's there now. I think the pitches of the schools now, I think, new houses, but it was just over the Erskine Bridge, in the shadow of the Erskine Bridge, just at the left-hand side as you're driving over, Keele School. And I can always remember playing there. There was a walk through the woods down to the pitch, the school pitch, and we would travel up for Gala 2.5 hours in the bus, or 2 hours in the bus in the morning. Probably a bus left Gala about 7 o'clock in the morning. We get there for a 9:30 kickoff, and the opponents, the Keele School boys, would come charging out of the woods, beating their chest, shouting and screaming. It was in the era when Psycups were on vogue, and I just remember all we were concerned about was kicking the ball at the Clyde, because the pitch ran right next to there was a wall between the pitch and the Clyde, and there could have been so much shouting and screaming and chest beating and fighting going on, but it's just these Gala lads up in the bus for 2.5 hours with the sole goal, we're getting the ball over the wall and out of the Clyde, and that's stick in my memory.
Some poor kitman or volunteer of some sort standing there trying to guard your kicks from going into the Clyde, protecting the balls that were most valuable to him. From things like that, I remember Paisley's pitch stands out for me. It was my first ever game of senior rugby. I had just turned 16. I still remember sitting in the dressing rooms. That's the other thing. Like the dressing rooms are iconic as well, because they're not designed for what is, on a full squad of 23 or even 18 as it is some of the games. You can't fit that many people in. So you've got guys sitting in the floor, you've got guys sitting in the showers, you've got folk having to take turns getting changed. I still remember that. Like, all right, you go, you put your clothes on, and then you sit down, put your socks on, and I'll put my clothes on. But I remember playing my first game of senior rugby at Paisley, and out the dressing room, and there'd been a bit of a chat in the dressing room about the fact that quite a few of the guys that I was playing with were easily old enough to be my father, and the usual jokes that go alongside that. But it was an intimidating place to play as well, because the crowd were very, very close, as you get quite a few of these club games.
How big a crowd, Al? How big a crowd are we talking?
Not a massive crowd. It wasn't a huge amount down.
Did they move with the play? Did they move up and down the touchline with the play?
Some people did. My dad did. So as a spectator, would wander up and down, and then he was always the guy, as every club needs, who would go into the gardens behind and get the ball back. So it was just, that was Alan Glenn's. Whenever there was a conversion getting hit, he'd be sitting muttering to himself, going, "Don't you kick that too hard? Don't you kick that too hard?" And then somebody either from Alan Glenn's or from opposition would stick it about 20 metres into the guard behind, which was then about a 5-minute walk to around and get the ball. But going back to Paisley, you were so close that if you're running up the wing, which I wasn't doing very often, but you were in danger not only from a defender coming across and taking you into touch, but from one of the spectators coming in and taking you back into the park, whether it was with an umbrella or just a stray boot. But there was some, I don't know, Ali Hogg playing with Ali Hogg. We played together with Ali Hogg for years. So we were playing for Stirling County against Grangemouth. And Ali got, and again, it was one of those ones where the spectators were very close. Bigger crowd this time. Ali got kind of ragdolled at the side of the park by one of the older guys at Grangemouth, thrown into the crowd. And he got thrown into the crowd right where his father was standing. And his father took exception to this. So he kind of stepped forward, probably no sort of rope or barricade. And there was a bit of an altercation, and I remember Ali Hogg's dad was holding his leather gloves. He didn't have them on, he was holding them. And he took his leather gloves straight off the side of this Grangemouth guy's face. And it erupted like you wouldn't believe. And then he got pushed back into the crowd and the game went on. So, yeah, there's been a few interactions with spectators over the years.
Can you remember the first time you played in a full-size pitch, or like a proper full-size pitch? Even from graduating you from under 15s, under 18s, whatever it was, and you'd play on school pitches and pitches just that were kind of made to fit the space. And then some of your first pitches, whether it was playing at Netherdale, the big pitch at Netherdale for me and Gala, or the Green Yards, or playing against the school teams in Edinburgh, they would do the Heriots at Golden Acre, or these huge pitches. We were just utterly exhausted after about 15 minutes.
I remember going and playing in pitches like Glasgow Hawks down at Anniesland for districts, so you were whatever you were under 18, and always thinking that they were about 3 times the size as a pitch that I was used to playing on at Alan Glenn's, and they weren't. They were exactly the same, or they may have been marginally bigger. But just because you were going, like for me, going from Alan Glenn's to one of these places where you're like, oh, it's a wee bit, and thinking they were massive pitches, they probably weren't. I think my memory of playing full size rugby pitches is that it started off as 13 a side. So I'm sure when I was coming through, you went up a level and you went on to a full-size pitch, but you dropped, you didn't have your flankers. So you only had one back row. So not only was it a big pitch, but there was less players on it as well. But yeah, I remember that. Also, the big change was, I remember the line-outs. So going from not lifting, kind of lobbing the ball in, and this is through the age groups, not through the law changes, but going through the age groups, and all of a sudden you were meant to be able to lift. Mm-hmm. And you had, like, the biggest boy there, right, let's chuck him up in there, and they were an absolute shambles. I mean, we couldn't get anybody off the ground. The ball was getting thrown at the same height, and then it was hitting guys in the back of the head. And that was probably the biggest challenge for us, because everything else you kind of grow up doing, but then you get these technical specific things like a line out. I suppose a scrum as well, but some's more graduated. I just feel as if it was no line outs or lob a ball into, boom, you've got line-outs.
Well, I remember when lifting came in, and it was a case where everybody concentrated on how to lift, but nobody worked on the timing. So you'd end up being, having your line out, somebody would throw in, there would be a jump, a land, then a catch. So there was utterly no point in doing the lift, because he'd mistimed it, he'd hit the ground and then caught it. But it's all part of evolution, I suppose.
Did you watch the game on Friday night that JJ was talking about? And he was talking about the fact they went in at the front of the line and tried to win the ball. Scotland's didn't go well that day. But then, to your point, it's an absolute lottery. Like they were calling codes. I don't know what good calling codes did. Nobody knew where it was actually going to go. Anyway, there was one right on the line. It was fantastic. Bob Andrew put a fantastic kick, and back in the day, even then, you didn't get the line out if it was a penalty. Mm-hmm. So it was Kenny Milne thrown in the line, and the first one went to pot, and then the net. It was just an absolute lottery where the ball was going to end up.
It was brilliant to watch, though. I mean, just how much the game has changed, though, isn't it, gents?
It was brilliant.
Massive.
Yes, the game changed, but then some of the stuff that was the same as well. Like watching that back row, that Scotland back row was just phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Finn, that carry we were talking about when Finn took it in, stayed in his feet, or David Scholl pretty much picked him off the ground, or even some of the little, big Chris Gray got done. They came back and they did Chris Day, I think, for whatever they'd done him for, But Finn had hit Rob Andrew about 5 minutes late. Like, he passed the ball and Finn had just came through and clattered them. So yeah, there was a wee bit going on off the ball as well.
And we've spoken a lot about how it changes, but there's core elements that still remain, or even things you can learn from games gone past as well. But I think what is important is, like, back then, I think players were more able to react to what was ahead of them, far less scripted, understood the probably flow of the game in some ways a little bit better, or what was needed when. But it's no less entertaining when you get a game like that. This is a free for all, but it's still good viewing, cracking.
What about the speed of the scrums?
I know.
The back row guys were jogging. If they'd taken the ball in and there was a scrum, the back row guys were jogging round and the ready ball was in and away.
But there's also no stoppages within the game. Like, if you think of a phase of play now that could be a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, I mean, you wouldn't have got that then. But you wouldn't have then, like as we do now, maybe have 30, 40, 45 seconds of water carriers or guys needing treatment. It's so intense that the guys need treatment almost at every stoppage. The stoppages
were in and away before.
Yeah.
Like, the current time now, it would take longer at the front row to get set up than it took for the entire scrum.
And there's a lot of good in that, and there's a lot of in terms of safety
elements as well.
Absolutely, but it's I suppose a slightly different era. But
no, none of the pushing and shoving or fighting, because I think because they knew that if it kicked off, it was really kicking off. If you were in, you were all in. It wasn't I grab the jersey and everybody push about like you see a lot of now. But back then, I think the reason you didn't get it was, well, one, you didn't have time because you had to get back in and get into the scrum as quickly as possible, and two, that you knew if it did kick off, then it was
you had to be good at
it. You had to be good at it.
Is that right? There was only one. Well, there was a forced change, but there was no substitutes.
No, you couldn't be substituted unless it was for injury at that point.
It's crazy.
There was a lot of guys sat on the bench an awful lot of times, like Scott Murray's record. But he wouldn't be the most. Jamie, you should have your book out on that. A lot of guys would sit on the bench who, ordinarily now might get 30, 40 caps, but didn't get close to it.
Yeah, it was a lot. Warren Gatland, wasn't he? He sat on the bench to Sean Fitzpatrick for however many years on the All Blacks.
I don't know how many times John Manson was on the bench as well. A good number, and behind Dave Hilton.
I think it used to be. It might be different now. It might have changed now. Probably unlikely to change actually with the number of times that players now go in the field. But Chris Whittaker, the Australian scrum half, I think held the record for most bench appearances per number of caps, because he sat on the bench to George Gregan for age. I mean, he picked up a lot of caps anyway. Yeah. But I think it was I don't know if you need to check your book, Jamie. But it's certainly
check my book.
40s, whatever.
Somebody can tell us. Somebody out there can message us in and let us know.
If you're listening, if you know, please get.
I think it was Chris Whittaker, whether it is or not. But it's
because George Gregan. I mean, he's in your club. Is he the leader of your club?
No, he was. He was 139, wasn't he? And there's a few overtook him. Richie McCaw, I think. Draco, Alan Wynne.
Alan Wynne's up there. I don't know if he's.
There's a few got over, but I think it was 139 caps or something. It's ridiculous.
I can't. When we're talking about club grounds, I can't talk about club grounds without talking about Strathhendrick. I don't know if you've ever played at Strathhendrick, Mossy or Jamie.
I did a coaching session out there after I stopped playing, but I never ever played there.
It sits right in the middle of the hills.
Yeah, it's scenic, isn't it?
Oh, it's stunning. You get on a nice day, it is stunning. You get it in the middle of winter when the snow's and it's another one of those ones. There's a wee bit of a walk. It's not too far, but from the clubhouse to the main pitch, there's a wee bit of a walk. And those are the ones that would always, it was a bit of a stark reminder that the weather wasn't great. Like, I remember Curry, Maleny for that as well. That you
got a bad day at Curry. You could get a bad weather at Curry.
And you weren't getting in at half time. Although you never did at the beginning, but that changed a wee bit because it was a decent distance away.
I once played in a game for Gala at Curry on a Tuesday night, a replayed fixture, late 90s or mid 90s at some point, and it actually got cancelled. It got called off during the game because of fog. So we kicked off. It got worse and worse and worse, and halfway through the second half, you couldn't see each other on a Tuesday night at Maleny, and I think it was after the 60 minutes, so the result stood. But it was a case of get to 60 minutes and then let's get off of here. It was amazing, just such a unique thing. Game abandoned because of fog.
Well, gents, let's open this up to our listeners. If anyone else wants to get in touch and let us know what their memorable grounds are, please do so across any of our social channels, and we'll give you a mention next week.
It could be anything, couldn't it? I mean, that's just something that came to the top of our head there, but there's so many for good reasons, for bad reasons, for funny reasons.
I've kept a few of the bad reasons in the back of my mind.
I know. They do tend to stay at the back of the mind, but some big wins, some heavy defeats. But it's just, and for the club game that's on this week as well, the replay of the cup game.
That's right.
It's
Greenock
important
against Berwick.
Yeah, it's important to think back, and I do enjoy thinking back to some of the journeys with the clubs.
Well, joining us now on the official Scottish Rugby podcast is Scottish Rugby Chief Operating Officer Dominic McKay. Dominic, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. I'll start off with a really simple question. We're all working from home in these challenging times, but what's a typical day like for you at the moment?
Hi, Jamie. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me on. I guess a typical day at the moment is a lot of video calls at the moment. I guess everyone's getting used to working by video conference. So as an organisation, we've got Microsoft Teams, which has been fantastic, which is meaning that we're all able to connect up with each other, either as individual one-to-ones or as groups, and they've been fantastic. So I guess a typical day for me rotates around back-to-back video conferences with members of the team at Scottish Rugby, members of our organisations that we're part of, whether it's Six Nations or Pro 14 or EPCR or World Rugby, or speaking to other unions. So and indeed also speaking to sponsors. So we're using video conferencing and videoing a lot at the moment, which has been fantastic. But it's probably busier at the moment than it's ever been, and that's natural given the huge challenge that the world's facing with this terrible pandemic.
Dom, how difficult is it with so much uncertainty out there to be planning for the future, and how much of the day-to-day we saw just this week that you've prepared BT Murrayfield ready in case it is needed from the NHS? How much is day-to-day of the operational side?
Well, there's naturally a lot of day-to-day things that one needs to react to because the environment around us, and it's the same for everyone, is changing. What we've tried to do to create a little bit of structure, about 6 weeks ago we established a thing called the Threat Management Group. And the Threat Management Group is a multidiscipline group that gets together every day to discuss the challenges that the coronavirus is causing our organisation and our people. So within that threat management group, we've got experts from medical, we've got experts from our stadia, we've got experts from finance, experts from the domestic game, experts from the high performance game, getting together and talking about the challenge that we've got around us on a daily basis, but also projecting where we want to be and what we want to try and be ready for over the coming weeks and months. And that group have done some fantastic work over the last 6 weeks, and that group will continue to do that great work over the number of weeks that we still have to go. And it's vital that we're able to react in real time to the challenges that are around us, whether they be finance, whether they be medical, whether they be government related. So we're trying to be reactive, but also be linked into a longer term plan. And ultimately, the plan is to try and make sure that we've got the strongest possible organisation once we pop through this challenging period. And we're trying to do that with our people at the centre of all of our decisions.
How difficult is that? Because I assume, I suppose instinctively you want to react to changes that come in from government, from health services, from stakeholders. But with so much uncertainty, you don't really want to react too quickly in case the information changes like it has done day on day. So is it mainly kind of scenario planning rather than reacting immediately to the messages and the information that comes in?
Yeah, so there's a balance between, I guess, reacting once things are known, mm-hmm. and starting to think about the implications of certain decisions or certain activity that is changing around us. So scenario planning plays an enormous part in the discussions that we have within that threat management group to think about and to consider the impact in our organisation as a result of certain things happening. And the group have been great at that over the last number of weeks. And if we think about even simple things, as an organisation of around 400 people, setting ourselves up to quickly decide to work from home and to get all the facilities and IT and infrastructure and the support around people to make sure that when they move to working from home and into that environment, they've got the right sort of support around them. So there's a whole raft of work streams that we're able to actively react to, but a bunch of other work streams that we're just constantly thinking about in terms of scenario planning. And we'll keep, feeding into that group all of the latest advice. And one of the great things that's happening is that we've got, I guess, a collaboration into that group, and we tap into expertise from other sports, expertise from other countries, expertise from other chief medical officers that are brought to the table by our own chief medical officer, James Robson. So it's a really useful group, and I know other organisations have similar groups themselves. Ours is serving as well.
And I suppose you're right, you'll have systems and structures like that in place anyway, but would this continue once we do come out the end of the pandemic, the other side? Would you include something as I suppose as important as that in everyday business? Yeah,
so everyday business, we've got a whole bunch of management activity that happen around the organisation, and those functions will fulfil a lot of their activities. But certainly anything that threatens the organisation or anything that could negatively impact the organisation, that group is established to look at. But what's been really pleasing is that the quality of discussion that's taken place in there, the quality of the decision making that's taken place in that group. We were very early in making some decisions ahead of perhaps guidelines that came to us from government. So we've been ahead of the curve in some of our decisions, which I think has stood us in good stead. But it's going to be a meeting for, I should imagine, many weeks, indeed months to come.
Dominic, you mentioned earlier on that your day is filled up with obvious meetings and plans and task forces. Just on that, probably one thing that you're talking about at the moment is the Guinness Pro 14. I know you sit on the board of the Pro 14 and also the European Games. Can you give us any update on those two competitions?
Well, I guess a little bit like scenario planning that Chris mentioned a minute ago there, we're having to do the same in a lot of different rugby organisations at the moment. Scottish Rugby is part of that global rugby family, and everyone's facing the same challenge just now. So from a Pro 14 perspective, the management at Pro 14 are looking at a series of scenarios to potentially restart the competition if we're given the green light to do that in a safe and sensible manner. But just to give you a bit of an insight into that, that's a very complex challenge, and partly because the jurisdictions which the Pro 14 operate in, Ireland, Wales, Scotland, Italy, South Africa, all have their own local government advice, and they also have their own medical advice for their teams. And that's not all necessarily aligned, so everyone's not necessarily working off exactly the same advice, because everyone's sort of started the challenge in respect to the pandemic at different points. So the scenarios that the Pro 14 are having to look at are trying to factor some of that in, which is very, very hard. So the credit to the team at Pro 14, they're working hard, coming up with potential solutions to restarting the season. But clearly that's all entirely dependent upon the government restrictions in each of those jurisdictions being lifted. And that's that's something that we can't see, certainly for the short to medium term.
And thereafter, usually, similar question really, but in terms of the summer tour, it's highly unlikely, we said last week, that would go ahead to the Southern Hemisphere. Has there been any, I know it's only a week, but has there been any further updates in terms of the international season?
There's no further updates at the moment. Lots of work happening in the background to look at options and again, scenarios there, that word again. And that's because what we are, I guess we want to try and give as much opportunity to make the right decision at the right time, and not to be too soon in making a decision, because it's all obviously interconnected to the global season. It's interconnected to the November tours. So there's a lot of work happening in the background, but it'd be fair to say that the challenge that we're facing in Scotland is mirrored in every rugby union and every rugby club really around the world right now. We clearly see it acutely because it's our issue in Scotland, but there's a lot of commonality in the conversations that we're having with other unions and indeed with other competitions.
Tom, you mentioned other unions and other challenges. There's been World Rugby funding been made available, and Scottish Rugby itself has made significant funding available to the clubs. How important is it everybody is working together, be it financially or planning for the future?
Well, the funding that we made available to our local clubs in Scotland we opened up a fund for £500,000 and also brought forward monies for the club game into the month of April. It was really important to us to try and recognise immediately that our local clubs, which are the bedrock of our sport, are, like the union themselves, going to be facing immediate financial challenges. So how do we best support them? And that was the thinking behind making that fund available. And through our threat management group, we get an update from Sheila Begley, our Development Rugby Director, on the progress of that fund and the number of applications that are coming through. And it's been really pleasing that a number of clubs have applied for that already, which is great. So that fund will really help support local clubs in terms of their immediate needs. The exact same principle is true at a macro level and in the international stage. So World Rugby are looking to create a fund that unions can tap into to support them over the next number of months. So we're beginning to look at that fund. The details are just coming out at the moment. We'll have a look at that and see how best we can make the most of it. So I guess it's an example of when rugby wants to work together, it can collaborate really effectively, both at a local level and an international level, because we're all grappling with a crisis that's around us just now, which has an enormous impact in our organisation and indeed the sport.
Dominic, there's been the reports in the media recently around just kind of remarks that were made around mass gatherings and sport taking place in Scotland in particular. I know you're having open dialogue with the Scottish Government around the use of the stadium, but I presume you'll be having chats about them around these big events, because we all know how valuable these are, not just to Scottish rugby, but to the community and the nation as a whole. Yeah,
we've had very good dialogue with the Scottish Government, and it's regular and it's constant at a number of levels. And we definitely recognise the remarks that were made by the First Minister recently in respect of mass gatherings and sport. And absolutely, we'll take the guidance from the government in respect of when it's ready, when it's right for the sport to recommence. But as part of our thinking within our threat management group, we're also looking at how best to set the sport back up again in terms of restarting. So we're looking at how best to get the sport restarted once we're given that green light by the government, because it'll be quite a different environment that we're restarting into from perhaps the one that was paused a few months ago. And there'll be a lot of collaboration between ourselves and other sports to make sure that we make the most of expertise and international advice. But yeah, the sport, I guess sport has an enormous role to play, both in terms of the economy. I think we generate around £130 million for the Scottish economy. We had a piece of work commissioned that confirmed that just a few months ago. I guess the second thing that's worth just mentioning is that the importance of sport to affect positively the mood of the nation shouldn't be underestimated. I think we're all quite rightly locked down and being based from home, and when it's right and when it's proper, I think sport's got an important role to play in projecting a very positive side of Scotland and a very positive side of our society. It's got the ability to bring happiness to a lot of people, and there's ways to do that don't necessarily involve immediate mass gatherings. So I guess as a sport, we'll be very open-minded about supporting the government and making sure that we can get people back engaged with sport, happy about watching sport, whether that's on television or whether that's in a stadium, as soon as we possibly can, but utterly respectful of the challenge that the government and the whole country is dealing with just now about when the right time to start releasing us effectively from that lockdown.
Dominic, you mentioned getting people back to watch sport at the right time. We did open up for questions from fans, and one of the questions that came in was around exactly that, a ticketing question. If people are buying their tickets as season passes, and autumn tests become vulnerable. Can you just share some of the processes and procedures that we've got in place to make sure that we're protecting the fans as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So whilst we would normally be on sale around now for autumn tests, we've deliberately delayed that to try and give a little bit more visibility for the autumn and the November window, just to get a sense of how things are beginning to sort of shape up. So we'll come back to our supporters and communicate when we're going to go on sale. So those people that are hanging out waiting for an opportunity to buy tickets to watch Japan or New Zealand or Argentina, rest assured we'll communicate with them and let them know when we're going to go on sale. But we're going to take our time to go on sale once we get a little bit more information. And those people that have committed to season passes already, which we're really grateful for, that they want to buy season passes, we're going to take our time and do our modelling and do our a review of what the landscape's looking like before we start taking those season pass monies into the organisation, because we want to make sure that our season pass holders, who are probably amongst our most loyal fans, have got the right sort of information around what's going to be happening in November, and indeed Six Nations for that matter. What's been pleasing to see is the number of, I guess, kind messages that have come into the ticket office, who are very understanding of the challenge that we are facing as we try and navigate through the potential scenarios of November and our summer tours. So I think our supporters are very smart, they're very clued in, and they're aware of the sort of challenge that we're facing, and I think are respectful of that.
Because this is so unique and it hasn't happened before, how creative do you have to be, or what are the creative solutions, or give us an idea of some of the creative solutions that we may expect to see when sport does start again? Obviously not in its guise that it would be, as we saw the last time it was on show. After this, are there creative solutions, ideas that you can share with us at all?
Yeah, I suppose that there are, and I think we're always looking as an organisation to try and innovate and do things a little bit differently. And indeed, over the last sort of few months, it's been really pleasing to try and, whilst we've been unable to put games on, we've been able to showcase as an organisation some of our archive, and it's been great to see some of the old games being rerun. And the interest in those games has been fantastic. Mm-hmm. I think we had over 150,000 people tuning in to watch the Calcutta Cup game this past weekend, and I think around 75,000 tuned in to watch the sort of previous games. So there's a real appetite for people to watch sport, and I guess that goes back to my point about sport's got a really important part to play in the sort of the mood of the nation. So content has been really upped over the last number of weeks. I think these podcasts are great. The video content that we're able to share with our supporters has been very important. The content that's coming out of Glasgow Warriors and Edinburgh Rugby has been great. We want to do more of that as much as we possibly can, for as long as we need to try and keep people and our supporters engaged with the teams. But going forward, I could see the way in which sport is consumed just changing ever so slightly. Mm-hmm. I think there's going to be some experiences that we will need to factor into any matchday activities and matchday communications in advance that will reflect any advice that we get from government. We began to do quite a lot of that activity during the Six Nations on the advice of the government, in terms of making changes to the stadium and the layout and particular messaging that went out to supporters in advance of the game. And I could for sure see that continuing going forward. But I think the other thing, which is very true, which is the way in which we consume our sport, of course, is great to be there. Nothing better than being there for the game and enjoying the live action. But I think the way in which sport is able to share content and rich content and engaging content with supporters is probably truer now than it ever was before, because I think the experience that people are having just now and engaging with content, engaging with their sport, will continue. So I think some of the innovations that you're seeing will continue for years to come.
Is there a chance of getting a cap for playing esports for Scotland, do you think, Jamie?
Well, you never know. I mean, it's one of the fastest growing parts of sport now. And then, we've already seen it. Old Glory, DC, our associate team in America, have bought into that MLR league over there. The NBA, the basketball, have got all that stuff going. But in Formula One are having virtual races. So, yeah, it's a great time to be creative and adaptive. And it's actually, the positive is it, I guess, Dom, is that it's an exciting time to be part of the game, even though we are going through this tricky time.
I think you're right. The stuff that's happening in America with MLR is great, and I know Pro 14, they're looking at that as well in terms of esports, because it's beholden on us, I guess, as administrators in sport, to try and innovate and try different things to make sure the supporters and the audience are connected with events. And we've got to just keep trying to do different things. Esports has been phenomenal. You can see its growth over the last number of years is making a lot of people sit up and take notice, and rugby's no different. I just don't think yet rugby's quite cracked it with a great game, but I would leave that to people who are closer to the esport action than I personally am. But I can imagine that there's going to be a lot of investment around that space in the months ahead.
Wait, Dom, sport, rugby in particular, plays a massive role in galvanising a nation and bringing people together. Surely now, probably more than ever, that's massively important when we look at people going through, different struggles within their life, and we're all going through, changes that we've got to adapt to. How big a part can rugby in particular play in that?
I think sport, as I said earlier, will play an enormous part in helping to lift the mood of the nation. When it's right and proper, and the government say it's okay to get back involved with sports, whether that's for the players to train with their mates, whether that's for the supporters to get together to watch games in the stadium with the appropriate restrictions, there's no doubt that sport has a massive effect on everyone's mental well-being. And there's no doubt that for many parts of society just now, it's a real struggle. It's a real challenge. People are nervous. People are worried and anxious. So we need to give them some hope. And I think sport has a role to play as part of a broad suite of activity. And when we come out of the lockdown, to lift the nation's spirits. And, when you think of the numbers of people that will watch a Scotland international rugby match, there'll be millions of people tuning in around the UK watching Scotland play. There'll be the stadiums are busy and bustling. There's no doubt that rugby's got an important role to play, and we want to help that happen when it's right and when it's proper, and we'll keep making sure we're engaged with government and other sports to talk about that.
Dominic, there was a decision made last week to furlough some of the staff, including the players. Could you talk us through the process of getting to the point where that decision was taken?
Our staff have been absolutely magnificent. Both prior to the pandemic, we had a really, really busy year, and have done an amazing job, creating wonderful events and great experiences and selling at the stadium. So the staff have been really magnificent. And then during the challenging periods over the last number of weeks, as we've grappled with the changing environment that we're all facing, whilst they're working from home, whilst they're working remotely, they've been absolutely brilliant. And it's been a really unsettling time for them and for their families, as it has been for our player group, who you would imagine would just be desperate to play games, desperate to train with their mates, and aren't able to do that. So, it's important for me to say thank you to both our player group and also to our wider sort of staff group, because it's an unsettling and challenging period for them. But we've opted to utilise the job retention scheme that the government have made available to all businesses. I think we, along with many other businesses, have opted to utilise that for obvious and very good reasons. But the process of engaging with our staff and talking with our staff has been really pleasing, because we've got super talented people in Scottish Rugby who've done some amazing things, and we're excited to get back together as a team when we can, when we're through this challenging period, and put on some new activities and show Scottish Rugby at its best in the months ahead. And we want our staff to help us make that happen.
Another group I know we've been working incredibly closely with as our partners, not just sharing some of the great rugby content that you already mentioned, but also a lot of what's going on in their worlds, a lot of the good that they're doing to try and help support people in these challenging times.
Our sponsors have been amazing, and it's been actually quite humbling just to see how they've stepped up, both as a sponsor but also in their own activities. I think about Scottish Power Energy Networks, the work they're doing to power the country and to make sure that we are all enjoying the power that we need during this challenging period, as well as activity that they're doing at a local and grassroots level in supporting communities has been fantastic. And that's the same whether it's BT and some of the activities that they've been doing for frontline staff. Our sponsors have been magnificent towards us, but they've also been magnificent, I think, towards the country and the communities in which they're engaged with. As have our own staff and their own players. Some of the activities that our players and our staff have been engaged with over the last number of weeks to support frontline staff, to support the communities in which they're living and working in, has been really humbling to see. And that's extended all the way through the whole of the rugby community. We've got local rugby clubs through the length and breadth of the country doing some incredible work supporting vulnerable people, whether that's delivering food or whether it's making phone calls. There's been some impressive stuff that's been done, I guess, at length and breadth of the country. And we shared a little bit of that last week online. And the stories have been great to hear. But our partners, our sponsors have been fantastic, and they're an important part of our story going forward, because we need our sponsors, we need our broadcasters, we need our supporters when it's right and proper to get back involved with the sport and fuel it and charge it back up again, because there are three main income streams as an organisation: ticketing, broadcast and sponsorship. And we want to make sure that we give them the right sort of platform to keep investing in the years to come and help our sport continue to thrive and grow and do the great things that it does.
Dominic McKay, Scottish Rugby's Chief Operating Officer, brilliant to have you on the podcast. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm sure we'll get you back on in a few weeks' time for another update.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, everybody.
Mossy Al, always great to get Dominic McKay, the Chief Operating Officer, onto the podcast to give us a bit of an update. Al, a lot of questions answered there. Hopefully the fans will appreciate that, but I guess there's still lots of unknowns around when sport will go back to normal.
I think that's the key point, Jamie, isn't it? That not just sporting organisations, but businesses, family, everybody at the moment is almost waiting to see. Nobody's got the crystal ball that can give the degree of certainty that we would all love, but it's just about doing the best job possible. And Dom is very honest there, talking about a lot of the challenges that are not only faces in the moment, but potential challenges that might face us in the future. But yeah, there's so much good work going on, and I do really back up the point about the fact that the sport's going to have a massive role to play moving forward. So it's massively important that we get the right procedures in place at the moment.
Yeah, I'd pick up the trend that came through that chat with Dom for me was that motivation, and the motivation is, getting at the right time the sport back up and running to help lift everybody's mood, get everybody back into the swing of things, and if that's the carrot or the motivation just now to keep everybody going, I think that's you're working towards a real positive. It has been so difficult, it's ever changing. There aren't a huge amount of updates because it is so uncertain, but the one thing for me the thread that ran through that was just the motivation for making the right decisions to make it to get back to something we resemble sport is really important. So with that drive as a positive, let's hope we get back as soon as possibly can.
It's worth mentioning as well, thanking everybody for the questions that they sent in. Hopefully we covered off the vast majority of topics there with Dom's answers.
That's all from us here on the official Scottish Rugby Podcast, together with the Royal Bank of Scotland. On the podcast next week, we'll be joined by Michelin star chef Tom Kitchen as he talks about his love for food and sport. Don't forget, the application window for the Royal Bank Rugby Force is now open. To be in with a chance to win practical and financial support to kickstart your club season, search Royal Bank Rugby Force.